Thanks for signing up for this morning's webinar about Bolivia. Not a huge destination that a lot of Australians have heard about or know a lot about, so it's definitely a good one to cover in today's webinar. La Paz is probably the most highly visited place in Bolivia, and that's the first thing we're going to talk about today. And then we're moving on to the colonial cities of Sucre and Potosí before getting into the Uni Salt Plains, which is definitely a must-see destination in Bolivia. And then finally we'll just talk very quickly about the Amazon and the lowland area of Bolivia as well. So Bolivia is one of the smaller countries in South America, and it's also one of the most diverse in terms of geography. It is South America's most indigenous nation, with about 40% of Bolivians claiming indigenous ancestry, and the country actually has 36 indigenous official languages. So it's a very, very diverse nation. Culturally, it's a plurinational nation, meaning they recognise the diversity of their indigenous population. And it's got three main geographical areas. Certainly the highlands is probably the most famous. Bolivia is very well known for the altiplano and for the mountains, but the highlands actually only comprises about 30% of the country. So that's the area from Lake Titicaca coming down through La Paz and across through this area in the southwestern corner here. Pretty much everything in the southwestern corner is above 3,000 metres, and that's the highland area. Then you've got the Valley on Yungas, which is sort of in a branch that extends through the middle of the country. And the Yungas is where Bolivia grows a lot of their crops, a lot of the coffee, and it's a really picturesque kind of cloud forested region, very similar in landscape to Machu Picchu and that sort of cloud foresty area in Peru. And then the tropical lowlands of Bolivia, which comprises the majority, 60%, is basically everything in this northern swath of the country. This is all the Amazon basin. And then you've also got the Pampas and lowlands area here, bordering Paraguay and Brazil as well. So despite being known for the high altitude parts of the country, really it's the lowlands that makes up the vast majority of Bolivia. In terms of the best time to travel, the dry season runs from March through to November, so that's sort of the ideal time really. The wet season December to February. So although there are a few reasons that the wet season is a good time to travel, particularly in the salt plains, the dry season is definitely preferable in terms of infrastructure and getting around the country. Getting there and away is very simple nowadays. There's direct flights into La Paz from Santiago. This is all with LATAM, by the way. So Santiago, Lima, and also from Cusco as well. So for passengers who are perhaps a bit pressed for time and don't want to come overland via Lake Titicaca, there's a direct flight from Cusco. You've also got Santa Cruz here in the west of the country, in the east of the country. It's actually Bolivia's biggest city. And from there we've got direct flights to Buenos Aires and also to Sao Paulo as well. Overland is the way that we bring most people into Bolivia, and that's obviously via Lake Titicaca is definitely the most popular route. You can get from Puno here in Peru to La Paz in one day, going via Sun Island on the Bolivian side of Lake Titicaca there. The second most popular route is probably into northern Chile, and that's coming via the Uyuni Salt Plains in the southwest there. Another less known route is to come from Uyuni down into northern Argentina as well. So there's a few different options of getting into and out of Bolivia. As I said, we're going to start off in La Paz, which is definitely the one place in Bolivia that tends to feature on most itineraries. La Paz is the administrative capital of Bolivia. So Sucre is actually the official capital, but the government sits in La Paz. It's the highest capital in the world, 3,650 metres on average. There are some parts of the city over 4,000 metres and some parts a bit lower than that, 3,600, but that's the average. And the city kind of sits in a bit of a bowl. So you've got the mountains all around the outside, and then the city kind of cascades down into this bowl valley. The markets are probably the most well-known thing about Bolivia, especially the witches market, and it's also got now the longest and highest urban cable car network in the world. So that was constructed with the help of the Swiss government, I think. and it's actually a really fantastic way of getting around the city. So you can probably get a bit of a better clue here. All the mountains around the outside here, this is the Royal Andean Range. Most of those peaks are over 6,000 metres. And then the city comes down to this basin here. So the southern parts of the city here are definitely much lower in altitude, and then you come all the way up into El Alto, where the airport is up in this area here, and that's well over 4,000 metres. Bolivia is, of course, as the most indigenous nation in South America. Certainly the culture and the dress and the rituals of the people are really interesting. You've got, of course, the famous bowler hat that you also find in Peru, and the traditional dress of the women, and this is still really common, even in the capital cities. The vast majority of women still dress very traditionally in the marketplaces. You've got the cable cars here, which is a really fantastic way of getting around, and actually has cut the commuting time for a lot of Bolivians now living in the capital. And the old historic centre also has some really nice old colonial buildings as well, so definitely worth a few days in La Paz. Outside of La Paz there's also some nice day trips you can do. So you've got here in the top left, this is, well, used to be the famous Death Road, I guess. So La Paz is kind of up here in the mountains somewhere, and this area that you're seeing is the Yungas that we talked about, that has a lot of the coffee and crop growth for the country. So the road from La Paz snakes down through these mountains and ends up in the tropical lowland area. The Death Road is no longer used for transportation, and so they've now got this really nice new superhighway which has made the travelling time much quicker and also much safer. And it's obviously a really spectacular trip, just coming down from like 4,000 metres in the mountains down to 400 or 500 metres above sea level. You come through some really contrasting landscapes, and that's a beautiful day trip coming down to Cotahuico. You've also got, heading west out of La Paz, you've got Tiwanaku ruins, which is towards Lake Titicaca. A hugely extensive site, and that's a really interesting place to go see as well. It's very, very different in style and in architecture to the Incan ruins that people will have seen in Peru if they're coming from that direction. And in Tiwanaku there's also a fantastic solstice festival every year on the 21st of June, so that's really worthwhile as well if you've got passengers in the area. A bit closer to the city itself you've got Moon Valley, and this is just to the south of the city, a really kind of bizarre lunar landscape that's included on most of the half-day city tours. And then you've also got here the Witches' Market, where you find all sorts of weird and wonderful like totems that people use for their houses, fertility items, a lot of dried llama fetuses which are used for the construction of new houses and so on to bring luck. So it's quite it's a fascinating place to walk around and have a bit of a look. Leaving La Paz, we can look next at Sucre. And I love Sucre. It's a really beautiful city, and it's also a nice change for passengers who are coming across from Peru. Sucre is actually located below 3,000 metres, so it's coming out of that altitude where height's a bit of a problem. It's got a really nice temperate climate, so for people who've come across from Cusco and are sick of the freezing cold and thin air, Sucre is a really nice change of pace. It's called La Ciudad Blanca, which is the White City, and that's because the vast majority of the buildings in the centre have this whitewash kind of style. Really beautiful architecture. It's a very, very pleasant place to be, and there's direct flights actually as well from La Paz and from Santa Cruz, so it's very, very easy to get there and away. And the road between Sucre and Potosi is now fully paved, and it only takes about 3 hours overland as well. I've also just put there, if you do ever have passengers interested in spending a bit of time somewhere and doing some Spanish lessons, Sucre is probably one of the best places in South America because the schools are very inexpensive. And yeah, Sucre is just a lovely little town to be in. As you can see from the city photo, most of the buildings there are white, and it's really, really pretty. It's a really nice central plaza. These mountains around the outside are all relatively low, so it's quite easy hiking around here as well. Sucre is also really famous for having a lot of dinosaur footprints in the region. So you can send passengers out on half-day trips in the city and you can see, or maybe you can't really see, but these are all dinosaur prints from the Jurassic period, and because of the nature of the landscape and so on, these have been preserved probably better in Bolivia than almost anywhere else in the world. And then these images down the bottom here are all from Tarabuco market, which is a market that happens every Sunday outside of Sucre. And the Tarabuco people have a very distinctive type of dress from the rest of the country as well, so that's quite interesting. Next we have Potosi, one of the highest cities in the world at over 4,000 metres. So again, you're coming up into the type of altitude where people can have problems. So it's important that if they haven't been at altitude previously, that you do give them a bit of a warning and some time to adjust. The main reason people come to Potosi is to visit the silver mine, and that is in this photo here. This is Cerro Rico. So this was the world's most productive silver mine, and still is actually. They've mined more than 60,000 tonnes of silver from this one hill. And they say that the amount of silver that was extracted from Cerro Rico was enough to construct a bridge from Bolivia to Madrid, where of course all the silver was shipped to, twice over. So it's a huge amount of wealth that's come out of this mountain, and that's really reflected in the architecture of downtown Potosi. Really impressive Baroque churches. Certainly when you see the level of poverty in Bolivia today, it's a contrast to the type of wealth that once existed there. You can actually visit the mine inside Cerro Rico, but it is definitely not for everyone. It's a really, really interesting experience, but it's very, very claustrophobic. Tiny little spaces, very dark, and relatively strenuous as well. So a lot of people are interested. We tend not to pre-book this tour, but rather offer it as something people can decide to do locally if they're up to it, because obviously with the altitude and so on, anything that's going to be a little bit stressful is not necessarily recommended. On the mining tour, they take you first out to the markets, and they show you the type of equipment that the miners use. They show you where they buy their coca leaves, the dynamite, all the stuff that they need to work inside the mines. Obviously you get these full kits with a hard hat, light, fully protective clothing, and then you actually go into the mine. So as I said, these are pretty tiny little spaces. It's dark, it can be a little bit scary, but your guide will take you in. You actually talk with working miners. They tell you about how the cooperatives work. So it's a very interesting tour, but yeah, bit hairy. Next up is the Uyuni Salt Flats. So pretty much everyone will have heard of these. It's definitely the must-see destination in Bolivia, in the southwestern corner of the country, and as far as I'm concerned, probably the most unique landscape in South America. There's really nowhere else like this anywhere else in the world. So here you've got the map. You've got Potosi here. From Potosi to Uyuni now, again, this road has been paved, so it's only, I think, 4 or 5 hours overland. But the vast majority of our passengers will come in from La Paz now with a direct flight. So there's an early morning flight from La Paz down to Uyuni that gets in about 6 a.m. From there you're picked up from the airport and taken straight off onto a private 4-wheel drive overland tour. So as I said, we can go from Uyuni across into the southwest into Chile this way, or you can do a circuit that brings you back, back up to Uyuni, and then down into northern Argentina along this route here. It is possible, if you've got passengers who are really, really pushed for time, to fly into Uyuni and do a day trip out just to see the salt plains. But I think that's really, kind of missing the best part. This whole southwestern corner of Bolivia is really, really amazing, and you'll see some photos soon. So although the salt plains definitely are what the area is known for, this southwestern corner is absolutely worth a look if people have the time to do so. Minimum overland trip from Uyuni to San Pedro would be a 3-day, 2-night tour. Start off obviously getting picked up on Uyuni on that first day. Generally speaking, they tend to differ from one company to the next, but generally they go from Uyuni out across the salt plains and ending up on that first night in Taua, which is a volcano. And then the next day they'll take you basically straight across, visiting the Cactus Island here in the middle for sunrise, and then coming out through into this highland area here. So you've got the Valley of the Rocks, which is pretty much what it says in the box. This whole area is altiplano, so pretty much over 3,000 or 4,000 metres the whole time. And then coming across this area to have the second night in Villamar. And then on the third day you're up really early again. They take you out to see the geysers, which is these Sol de Mañana here, so some thermal geysers at 5,000 metres above sea level. And then you've also got the coloured lagoons, which you may have heard of. There's the red lagoon here, the green lagoon, and these are coloured because of the mineral makeup of the lakes. So that's me. The salt plains are the biggest in the world, so 10,000 square kilometres. It's hard to really get a sense of just how immense these are until you've driven across them for several hours without seeing anything on the horizon. This is where you do all those really fun perspective photos as well, which you probably will have seen. In addition, though, as I said, the salt plains are just one part of the trip, so you've also got this amazing mountain scenery. This is at one of the little villages where you overnight. This is the Salvador Dali Desert, so named obviously for kind of the surreal aspect of the landscape. This kind of remote, dry area goes on for miles and miles and miles, and then out in the middle of nowhere you've got these bizarre rock formations which are caused by all the really high winds and erosion that happens up there. Surprisingly, you've actually got a really amazing diversity of wildlife in this region too. So very weirdly, at over 4,000 metres you find the flamingos. Several species are actually found in the southwestern corner of Bolivia. You've also got obviously llamas and vicuñas and alpacas. And then these little guys are vizcachas, which I think are related to chinchilla. So yeah, there's a surprising amount of wildlife considering you're in one of the most barren parts of the world. This is the typical four-wheel drive car, so your luggage and the cooking pots and everything is stored on the roof. You can fit 4 people in these four-wheel drives, but we 99.9% of the time do 2 per vehicle, so you've got a bit more space to stretch out because it is a lot of time in the car each day. You've also got thermal springs along the way, so people can have a nice warm bath at I think 4,200 or so, and it's quite surreal. You've got all these mountains with the snow in the background and then this nice relaxing thermal pool. The accommodation is necessarily rustic, and these photos actually make it look quite nice, but yeah, it is very rustic accommodation. When you're out there you'll understand pretty quickly there is nothing around. It's very, very remote. There's just not a huge amount of choice out there. So the hotels we use are the best available, but it is important to tell your passengers that this is definitely not a luxury tour. If you've got very, very, very high-end people who only want the best of the best, there is this deluxe Airstream option, which is very, very nice. But still, I mean, you can see by the interior, at the end of the day, it's still a caravan. So although this is the deluxe option, it's still relatively low-key. But I think that the landscape and the uniqueness of the destination more than makes up for the fact that it might be a little bit less comfortable than what people are used to. Finally, finishing up with the Bolivian lowlands. So this is the majority of the country, as we said. Just going to touch on it very briefly because not a huge amount of people visit this part of Bolivia. There are actually quite a few jungle lodges in the north out of Rurrenabaque, which is the flight from La Paz. So there are some more rustic options if people would like to visit the national parks there. Madidi is probably the most famous one. Huge diversity of wildlife. But yeah, passengers just need to be aware that the infrastructure is not as good as it is in Peru or Bolivia or, Peru or Ecuador or Brazil. But yeah, it's a very interesting option, and it's also good to support some of the community tourism in Bolivia as well. In the northeast of the country, you start to see people who look very, very different from the Highlanders. So these people actually came down. There's 2 sets of people who came into Bolivia. There's some who came down through the mountains, which is the more kind of, I guess, the descendants of the Inca and the Aymara people. And then people in the lowlands actually came down through Venezuela and so on through the middle of the Amazon. So yeah, just interesting in terms of the cultural diversity as well. Festivals in Bolivia are actually some of the most impressive in South America. So you've got, as I said, this is the solstice at Tiwanaku. I think it's probably the second biggest outside of Carnival. It's absolutely freezing, but it's definitely worth doing, and it's very, very traditional. So this is not something that they do for tourists. Actually, there's very, very few tourists who visit, but it's really still very important to the Aymara and Quechua people. So that's worth a look if you have people who are up for it. This is the Carnival in Oruro, which is, again, probably the second biggest outside of Rio. Amazing costumes. This is a multi-day party. Unfortunately, Oruro just has terrible infrastructure and hotel services, so passengers really need to be aware, again, that it's not going to be a luxury trip, but it's totally unique in terms of the costumes and everything that you see there. The question for the Famil today is, true or false? Does landlocked Bolivia have a naval force? And you'll probably be able to guess the answer to that one, but otherwise just Google it. And replies go to contours@contourstravel.com.au, please. That's for our Famil to Ecuador and the Galapagos next year, so definitely worth getting in on that one if you can. And finally, just finishing off, if anyone has any questions, and also just to remind you that obviously in addition to Bolivia, we cover everything from Mexico right down to Antarctica. So if you do have any inquiries or questions relating to any part of South or Central America, please feel free to contact us. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, if you wouldn't mind just typing those in now, and I can try and answer them as best I can. All right, sounds like that's all pretty clear. So thanks again for joining us this morning, and the webinar will actually be available on the YouTube channel if anyone does want to watch or to share it with your colleagues or anything. And if you think of any questions between after when I close the webinar, feel free to just email us and we can get back to you. Okay, enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a good weekend. Cheers, bye.